Hello, welcome to today's lighting feedback. So, let's kick it off. We've got Carolina back with the attic scene, and it is looking great. I love to look at the different iterations and as we go. So, this is one of the first ones. I think this was the first one, and this is the current day. And while I will say, often people if you're not a lighter, especially, you're kind of like, oh, it looks pretty much the same. But no, there's so many subtle differences here, and I'm really loving it. Like before the fall, we didn't have much fall off here, but it's nice, and the intensity was a little too bright. I now have a nice fall off. We have it's softer. It kind of definitely aligns, I must say, with the reference really well. And overall, I think it's been doing really well. And other things that I'll say that makes really the difference between lighting, the subtleties, are this this shaping here, where here before it's all one value. From here all the darks are kind of one value, but now if you look, you're getting the subtle grad, and it kind of goes darker here, and that's all the difference when it comes to lighting and getting to the next level. So really well done. I know, I think in the chat I said it was approved, but I have notes. There's always notes, right? We could critique forever. But these are good ones, so it shouldn't take you long. The one thing I noticed as I just pulled it up here is that if I'm looking at the previous version, and I note, you did a great job kind of getting that bounce light in, how I said, oh, this light should bounce up there, right? But what I am noticing now is that we're missing the contact shadow, the ambient occlusion, essentially here, the darkening, and it lost that somehow. It's feeling overly filled. So I think the bounce light, the light here, is too strong and possibly too it takes up too much space. It should just be kind of confined to a smaller area too, right? Because it's really subtle. So I would kind of hone that in, and then so it brings back this darkness here, the contact here on the door, because we don't want to lose that. And I'd let this go to darker also. Obviously, it's not a hard light here, but I'm just showing you how I think, when the bounce should only really affect a small portion of this wall, not the entire wall. And with that in mind, I also think you can afford to go a little bit darker here at the edges, like a nice vignetting to really help hone your eye in even closer, right? So I think that would be super valuable. But overall, I think, it's nearly there. Another thing, this door can go also a little darker too, especially as it reaches up. We want this to be subtle. And I think that's a big thing in lighting also, where, often, and I'm guilty of this all the time, even now, where I'll go big. I want to see the light, I want to see the color, I want to see all this stuff. So I'll kind of really increase things more than they should be, and then it's the art form of bringing it back to that subtle phase. And I think that's what we're doing now, and I think it's great. I think just do these things, and yeah, I can't wait to see it again. It's really almost there. This is the finishing touches that will really take it to the next level. So well worth it, and yeah, amazing job on it. Next up, we've got Holly. Awesome. And thank you for taking a great job taking the tips. What we said was, don't, if you're doing something that's animated, don't run the animation, especially if you don't have a render farm at home, which most of us do not. The first iterations, just pick single frames, beginning, end, and possibly middle, depending on how much the frames move, and then base it off of that. So great job on that. And overall, let's compare it to the reference too, and I like to see it side by side. So overall, she's fitting she's back. She's fitting into the environment, which is great. I think so. To start off, I like to kind of look at the values compared to like the reference, let's say, and what I'm seeing on screen. And the big thing here is like it's not going to be exact. So since this scene is not indoors where the reference is indoors, we're not going to, it's going to be a little bit harder to get like that nice like vignetting that's happening, but we can still like match the values and get that overall mood, right? So if I'm looking at the environment first, I'm checking like, what's the value of the environment? Does it match? Is it too, um, too bright? And for me, like, it's really close, right? If I'm looking at here to here, I'm like, yeah, I could see that. But overall, I feel like it can come down. I think like it's flattening out a little too much. I'm curious what you're doing, what kind of light you are using for the environment too. Let me know. But yeah, I think overall, let's bring down the environment. The fill is what I'm talking about. What's filling up this environment. So that's the first step. The other thing is I'm looking at the key light then, like the intensity of the key light, and just looking here, like at her body, it's feeling super strong. Also, this building behind me, I can see how strong it is. So that is another thing to start looking at. Like, okay, what's the value of this key? And looking at the reference, it's much softer here too. It's much lower. It's much softer. So let's match that. Another thing I'll say is I'm curious what the shaders on your scene are doing, because this is where, well, I'm curious because this robot character is so dark, right? Like, but then her outfit is like catching so much light. Um, so is it the robot shaders? I'm pretty sure it's probably something with the robot shaders that's doing it, since like the whole scene itself is pretty bright except for this robot. And this is a good example of how materials and lighting really work hand in hand, because if the materials are, the shaders are off for some reason, like they're not catching light in the same way as the environment, or things aren't calibrated in like kind of real life, it's gonna be hard for the lighting, right? This is why, and I think I mentioned this in the shading class, but like whenever you start a scene, you want to, especially for shading and texturing, you want to just throw all the assets, all the elements, the scene into like a default lighting. And default lighting is just like a neutral lighting setup where it's no drastic contrast. So everything's like pretty well filled, so you can see the details, but you know how all the materials are reacting to the same neutral lighting. So that's what way like call outs on that would be if you throw two characters in a scene and one character is like blowing out. Maybe I should check the specular, properties on that material. Maybe it's just like too pumped up, right? And of course you can adjust shaders later on, and that happens. But ideally you don't need to, right? Ideally the shaders are built in a way that aligns with everything else in the scene, so the lighting reacts correctly, no matter what. You don't have to finagle special things like light linking or whatnot because of shaders. So that's my long-winded way of saying let's check these shaders on the robot here, because something's going on. He's having a hard time, or they're having a hard time catching light here. So I'm curious what's going on there. So let's start there. So let's bring down the environment, bring down the key, soften it, and also take an investigation, look at the shaders here on the robot especially. But overall, I think it's great. I think, I know it can be frustrating sometimes to kind of start again. I don't want to say start again, but like, kind of take a step back. But often, it's like one of the best things you can do, especially when you've been working on something for a while, but also if you find yourself, churning, and I do this all the time, and professionals do this all the time too, right? So it's all part of the creative process. So I can't wait to see your updates on that. Great job. Moving on, we've got Samuel back. Amazing. So I was looking at your updates, and I saw in your notes how you said, I think you said it was trickier this time around, but I think you nailed it. I think you did a great job. Like looking at, you know, the first iteration. I don't know if that's your first one, but that was one of your earlier ones. And then here, excuse me, is the most recent. And like, boom, just when I did that, my eye goes straight here. How about you? Before, I was like over here in this corner. I think I was over here, but this just like fell in darkness. But now, talk about drawing the eye. And everything is doing really well. Like, even like the subtle things of bringing this lamp down in the background is like setting it back now. It's there, it's lit, but it's not distracting. It's like kind of part of the environment. So awesome job. A couple things I'll say is, one, I would like it if, I think the spec is really nice. Now let's just bring up his eyes so they kind of, they're brighter. And when I say this, don't like glow it, don't like brighten up so it feels fake, but just, give it a little bit more light here so it really resonates and I go straight to that eye. I'm talking about like the eye whites or the eye, like you can just allow a little bit more light. And often we call them, we used to like sometimes create actual little eye lights. And there actually be like really soft spotlights on the eye for this exact reason. And it's subtle. Like it doesn't look like a key lighter. It doesn't look like, oh, you just shined a big light on it. I mean, it just brings this and it feels like it's part of the key, right? But you wouldn't know unless you actually lit it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, like a very soft, subtle spot essentially that is highlighting this area. So it just really helps us bring our eye straight there. Excuse me. Yeah. Because right now I'm going here, which is good. Like it's definitely, way different and I think much more successful than here. But now let's bring it to the next level. I think you can even bring this down very slightly, like 5%. And then bring this up here. And the other thing I'll say that I'm missing a little when I was going just back and forth here is I did like this highlight here. And I know it's still there and it's a little subtle. I don't want you to go as hot as this, but bring it back just slightly so we can get a nice kind of lead to here. Because if it had a nice feeling of like, okay, that's where the light's coming from, right? So bring this back. And if it means like this comes back up a little, that's fine. But yeah, bring a little bit of that back. Not to this value. I would split the difference. Yeah, so do that, split the difference here. Highlight this eye a little bit more, subtle, don't make it feel obvious. And then the other thing I'll say is this background here. Right here, this border is distracting me because it's all one color. I mean, it's all one value. And what I'd love to see is if it grades down. So it gets darker as it gets to the bottom here. And sometimes, honestly, I would do something like this in comp, depending on what it is. But you'll see, once you do that, it will really help ground that background and reseed it even more. So, amazing job. Again, look at the differences. This is why I love having progress frames, because sometimes you work on something and you're kind of like, I don't know, am I doing anything? And then I'll like go back to progress frame and I'll be like, yeah, I'm doing something, and then I'll keep on going on. So I hope you feel the same way. And you've been like, this is amazing, between here and here. So, and this is just a short period of time. So really well done. Okay, now let's get in the Christmas spirit, the winter wonderland spirit. So Ingrid, awesome. I'm catching up on this. I think the glow, you did a great job in Nuke, and I think glows are so powerful. I love to glow everything out. One thing I was thinking of when I was looking at yours and your reference with, um, kind of the blue, the night sky, and the warm light, is looking at yours. I'm liking it, and you're wondering like, oh, what else can I do? And a couple of things came to mind. One, I feel like you can cheat this light a little bit more and have it affect more of this area here. I was looking at like look at the reference. How I know this is a fire, so it emits a lot more light, but like look at how it just shines on their face, and that really helps with the composition, right? Because we're seeing this, we see their faces. Here, if I erase so you don't see that I just drew that, we're not getting that same effect here. And I know like this light probably throws off less light than the fire. This is where we can use creative license. Like if like we can bounce it up and pretend like ooh, and add a nice glow and highlight here on his face. Just compositionally, it's gonna read so much better, and it's gonna, I'm gonna see Santa's like eyes, and feel happy and jolly. So that is one thing. Play with that. Let's extend this warm light to kind of highlight right here. And then the other thing I think we have room to do is the blue from the sky. Like the reference, both references have the blue sky in it, so I think that helps with the composition as well. This frame, I don't think we would see the sky. I don't know, would it be over here? I don't think so. But in order to get that kind of blue, I think you have more leeway to add a little bit more fill here, like a blue fill. But keep this to the dark. Like you want to keep that depth, but I think you have a little bit more room to add some fill here. And bring a little bit more light in. So try those two things. One thing I was thinking about is adding even like a subtle blue. I feel like I should do that in another color. I'd like a subtle blue rim, but I think that's a little bit too much creative license because we wouldn't see that. But I thought it'd be an interesting way to pop him out from the background. Don't do that yet. Let's just do adding a little bit more fill light here, getting more of this warm light on his face there. And then the other thing, as you're glowing this out, I'm kind of curious if you can soften this light a bit too. But this is probably due to the geo being polygonal, right? If so, don't worry about it. But I was just curious if we could get like just a softening overall of this light to give it that softer feel. But overall, I think it's great. I can't wait to see the updates. And yeah, everyone did an amazing job. In the meantime, keep it going and happy lighting.